I've come to see that you can't understand Revelation unless you begin with the book of Daniel. All right, that's I think where many people may go wrong. You can't understand Revelation unless you begin with the book of Daniel, because Revelation is really an expansion on certain ideas which God highlighted in the book of Daniel. So even though I don't really see the benefit in going through the book of Daniel verse by verse, I know most of us have been through that in maybe the time when we were in the church studying the book of Revelation, but there is benefit in studying through verse by verse every word in the book of Daniel. But from our perspective, what I would like us to do is to look at the parts that are most strikingly related to Revelation, to gain an overview, a broad understanding of what is happening in the book, and to go from there. All right, we're not going to go through Daniel verse by verse, is what I'm saying. So, understanding Revelation, that's what I'm going to entitle this series again. And so I'll start with the question: how important is it? How important is it to understand the book of Daniel? Because that is the first question. How relevant is it? If it's wasting our time, why do we bother with it? Why do we waste our time with it? So the first question is, how important? How important is it? You know, all of us can understand, can agree that it is important for us to understand how to be saved. But I think that's a topic that we understand as thoroughly as anybody else in the world. How important is it to understand the difference between law and grace and all the rest of it? But we've all been through that. How important is it to understand the truth about God? And we all believe it's very important. But now the question is, how important is it to understand the book of Daniel? And to answer this question, I think it's good if we take God's answer. Now, this is taken from the last chapter in the book of Daniel. And it's not an answer that was given by Daniel or by any human being. Daniel was given this answer by a being from heaven. So he has been explaining certain things relating to the prophecies of Daniel. That's in chapter 12, the last chapter in Daniel. And he comes down to the end, and Daniel says, and I heard what he was saying, but I understood not. I didn't understand. Then said I, O my Lord, what shall be the end of these things? And he said, go thy way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end. All right, so I'll come back to that. Let me just finish the passage. He says, many shall be purified and made white and tried, but the wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand. All right, so if I were simply somebody who is a complete novice to the Bible, I didn't understand anything about the Bible, but I believed in the Bible, and somebody took me to this verse and I read this verse, or these verses. It tells me that the book of Daniel, the words in the book of Daniel were closed up and they were sealed till a certain time, which is the time of the end. And furthermore, I was made to understand that none of the wicked will understand, but the wise will understand. Even if I was somebody who had very little understanding of the book of Daniel, there would arise in me a strong desire to understand what is in the book of Daniel, or what these prophecies about, because it says that those who understand will be the wise, and those who don't understand are categorized as the wicked. So if you look at the end of time and you think that there are two groups of people, there are the wicked and there are the righteous, there are the foolish and the wise. Here they are separated as the wicked and the wise. One group won't understand, and those who don't understand are the wicked. I would know that it is my privilege, my responsibility to fight with all my might to be among those who understand. In other words, I would think it is a very important thing for me to understand whatever it is in the book of Daniel that is closed up and sealed till the time of the end. The other question I want to ask is, what is this time of the end? Now, it seems obvious, so why would I ask such a simple question? And I'll tell you why. Because there are quite a number of people, including, well, mostly theologians, okay? But it includes quite a number of people who might be of our persuasion. They believe that the time of the end referred to the time when Jesus came to this world. So they believe that, give me a second, let me turn on my fan. Yeah, they believe that many of the prophecies that speak about the time of the end were referring to the time of Jesus, because they believe that the time when Jesus came was the time of the end. This is kind of like, I don't know, let me say it's an idea that is embraced by many people who consider themselves to be theologians. You know, some of them even believe that the book of Revelation is already fulfilled. There's a kind of very liberal approach. I call it liberal. You know, I think it is a blind approach. It is true that in a sense, when Jesus came, it was the time of the end. It was the end of the old covenant. It was the beginning of the new covenant. But it's clear when you look at the context that the book of Daniel is talking about the time of the end, meaning the end of the world. Let me look quickly. Let's just go quickly to the Bible itself. Let me go to Daniel 12 and look at the verses, and you will see why it is clearly talking about the end of the world. So let's go to Daniel, the book of Daniel, and we'll go to chapter 12. If you go to chapter 12, look at what it says here. In these are the verses we are looking at. Verse 10, many shall be purified and made white and tried, but the wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand. And the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end. Now, look at the beginning of the verse, beginning of the chapter, and you'll see that the end of the time of the end cannot be referring to the time of Jesus. Look at what it says. And at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince which standeth for the children of thy people. And there shall be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. And at that time thy people shall be delivered, everyone that shall be found written in the book. And many of them that sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. And they that be wise shall shine as the brightness of the firmament, and they that turn many to righteousness as the stars forever and ever. And look, and this is where he says, but thou, O Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book, even to the time of the end. So it's very clear that when the time of the end is mentioned here, it is referring to the time just before Jesus comes again, just before the resurrection. It talks about some those who sleep in the dust of the earth awakening, some to everlasting life. Clearly, this is referring to the second coming of Jesus. Some to shame and everlasting contempt. So there's no question when the Bible talks about the time of the end, it's talking about our days, not the time when Jesus came the first time. So what am I saying? I'm saying this is my answer to the question. Go back to the question. How important is it to understand the book of Daniel? For us who live in the end of time or in the time of the end, it is extremely important, because it says the wicked shall not understand. The book of Daniel was closed up and sealed until the time of the end. It was closed up and sealed. God closed it up and sealed it till the time of the end. So nobody could understand it until the time of the end. But I think all of us can look at the events that are taking place in the world, and we agree that we are living in the time of the end. So it is now that the book needs to be understood. It is now that God has designed that the book should be understood. And so we can understand why it makes sense that right now, God not only is leading us to read and to study the book, but to understand things that were never understood before. So, part one of this presentation I want to entitle Daniel Holds the Keys. Daniel holds the keys. And what do we mean by this? We mean that in terms of understanding the book of Revelation, the book of Daniel holds the key. If you don't find the key to Revelation in the book of Daniel, you will study Revelation and you can't understand it. And many people do this, right? I was interested a few weeks ago. Well, sometime in the past, I started looking in the internet to see if there are other people out there who are studying the book of Revelation. You know, I'm trying to pick everybody's brains to see if I can find any kind of light anywhere that can help me to better understand. And when you can look and you can find understanding the revelation, unfolding the revelation, revelation made simple, the keys to revelation, all kinds of studies out there on YouTube and websites relating to the study of Revelation. And it's almost like a hopeless task to try to go and to get sense out of some of the things. The ways that this book is interpreted are extraordinary. You know, I know what I always think is that, you know, everybody thinks that his way is the best way. So maybe I'm thinking that way too. But honestly, some of the ways that people approach the book and the interpretations they come up with, if it were not so tragic, you'd burst out laughing to think that people can come up with such silly ideas. But anyway, there is a key. There are keys to understanding Revelation. If you don't get the overall idea right, you can't get the details right. In the book of Daniel, we get the overall idea behind Revelation. And that's why I will start with this background information in Daniel before we jump over to Revelation. Daniel holds the keys. Now, let's begin with a basic outline of the book of Daniel. Get an idea of what Daniel is like. Like I said, we won't study in great detail, but if we look at the overall outline of the book, it will be helpful. So, the book of Daniel is made up of two parts, or two different types of material. I suppose in today's terminology, you could say Daniel has two different genres. I think that's the word they might use today, but I really mean two different types of information. First of all, there's history, and secondly, there's prophecy. Two different genres, I would say, okay? And what you find is of course, that when it comes to prophecy, the Bible uses very special symbols. When you are studying prophecy, you can't approach it the same way you approach the ordinary historical or the narratives in the Bible. If you read that Jesus saw a blind man sitting by the roadside and he went and laid his hands on him, that's history. It happens exactly how it is written. There's a blind man, Jesus goes over to him and he puts his hand on him. If you read it in prophecy, it's likely that it is not what happens. No. Jesus represents something. The blind man represents something. The laying on of hands represents something. In actual fact, Jesus wasn't there, no blind man was there, and no hand was laid on him. But a picture is given to us that we have to interpret. Now, one of the problems I see also is that people read the ordinary narratives of scripture and they try to use the same prophetic way of interpreting it. So they say Jesus doing something and they say, this is what it means. They put a meaning to what Jesus did. And most of the time, no, you can't approach the Bible that way. You have to understand the different ways that God reveals the truth, depending on, again, I want to use the word, depending on the genre, the kind of material that he's presenting to us. So in Daniel chapters 1, 3, 4, 5, and 6, what we are given is history. It's the history of Daniel in Babylon and what happens in Babylon while Daniel is there. It's a story. And it's exactly what it is. It sets out to be a story that you can read and understand what happened to Daniel in the past. In chapters 2, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11, 9, 11, and 12, for the most part, what we are looking at is prophecy. There's some kind of historical background to introduce the prophecy, but it's prophecy for the most part. And a lot of what we are seeing is symbolic and representational. Now, let me say something about the first, about these historical chapters. Let me say something about them. Even though we're looking at history, we are looking at things that actually happened. Yet, even though things that happened actually are not prophecy, they can have some kind of prophetic meaning. And in this case, they are not said to be prophecies. They can be said to be, let me write a word here. They can be what we call types. Types. All right. So you have what do we mean by types? A type is a parable or a prophecy that is experienced and lived by the people in one generation. For example, when Moses led Israel out of Egypt, did it really happen? Yes, it happened. But it is a type. What is it a type of? It is a type or an illustration of how Jesus will take his people out of the Egypt of sin. It has a greater meaning. There's a greater meaning to it in the future, but it's not directly a prophecy. It's a story that happened in the past, but because it has a repeated experience in the future, it is said to be a type. And in this sense, it is a prophecy, but it's not a direct prophecy. It's an indirect prophecy. It's an illustration which points to something to be fulfilled in the future. And what happened in the past has similarities to what will happen in the future. You understand? So history can be a kind of prophecy. A type is a kind of prophecy, but it's not a direct prophecy. And you can't use the same rules in looking at both things. So what do I mean? When you look at Daniel chapter 1, you find that Daniel and his friends were put in Babylon. They were put in Babylonian captivity, and they were put in a situation where they needed to behave like the Babylonians, but they refused to behave like the Babylonians. They would not eat their food. They would not behave like them. And as a result, they were 10 times wiser than all the wise men that were in Babylon. So this is a lesson for the people of God who might find themselves in the Babylons of today, that even though you might find yourself there, you don't behave like the Babylonians, and you don't partake of the Babylonian food, and it doesn't necessarily mean literal food. You don't imbibe what the Babylonians are imbibing. You don't enter into their entertainment. You are there, but your behavior and your attitude and your approach is completely different. As a result, God was able to gift Daniel in a very special way with an understanding of prophecy. In chapter 3, we have the story of where the king was infuriated with Daniel's three friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, because they would not bow to the king's golden image, and so they were cast into a burning fiery furnace. And of course, everybody knows that this is a striking type. It's a parable, it's an illustration, a lived parable. It's something that really happened. but it points to the future when there's going to be another image made up, and everybody is going to be told to bow to this image, and God's people will stand and not bow to the image, and they'll also be thrown into a burning fiery furnace, not a literal one, figurative one, but a real time of trouble just the same. So you can see that chapter 1 is a type, it's a kind of prophecy. Chapter 3 is a kind of prophecy. Chapter 4 tells about the king eating grass like a cow and going mad for 7 years. Chapter 5 talks about the overthrow of Babylon, another type, referring to the overthrow of the great Babylon at the end of time. And chapter 6 is about Daniel being thrown into the den of lions. So most of these stories, they point towards some greater similar event in the future. So even though we might say that the book of Daniel has 6 prophetic chapters, in a way, all of the book of Daniel is about prophecy. All of the book of Daniel is about the end of time, because even the historical chapters are pointing to things that will happen at the end of time and giving us a miniature representation of this end time great crisis. All right, so I'm hoping that all that I just said is simple and easy to understand. Let me pause for one moment and ask, is there anything that I just said that is not clear enough to anybody? All right, wonderful. Let's move on. The key to understanding the book of Daniel. Now, I have something here on the screen. It's actually not even my idea, but I found it to be a very wonderful idea, something that I've really embraced, and I find that it is absolutely true. The key to understanding the book of Daniel, these words here. The circumstances of Israel. Now, we're not talking about the book of Revelation, remember. We're talking about the book of Daniel. What is the key to understanding the book of Daniel? And the key is understanding the circumstances of Israel. So we're going to take a little while and look at the circumstances of Israel, so we can understand what is Daniel really talking, what is the book of Daniel about, and consequently, what is the book of Revelation about? First of all, we want to understand what is Daniel focused on, what is it talking about? Why is this important? Again, a lot of what I'm looking at is partially in response to people who come up with false ideas. Wrong ideas don't seem to be significant sometimes, but the thing is that one wrong idea leads to another wrong idea, and before you know it, you completely distort the message that God wants the world to hear. But you start off with one small faulty understanding and you build on it, and the end result is a whole structure that is completely wrong. So I want us to start correctly. What is the book of Daniel focused on? And when we understand this, it has implications for the book of Revelation, and we will see how. So the key is understanding the circumstances of Israel. And what do we mean by this? Well, to put it simply, I'm going to highlight words again. Israel was a kingdom which had been completely destroyed. This is the key to understanding what is going on in Babylon. Babylon, in the book of Daniel. The book of Daniel, it does not just sit in isolation. You know, there are many very learned Bible scholars who will tell you that Daniel 2 speaks about the kingdoms of the world. They agree. Daniel 7 speaks about the kingdoms of the world. They agree. Daniel 11 and 12 speaks about the kingdoms of the world. down to the end of time, they agree. But they tell you Daniel 8 has nothing to do with the kingdoms and their conflict down to the end of time. They'll tell you that Daniel 8 is dealing with something completely different. And you will see that it doesn't make sense. But first of all, let us understand the circumstances of Israel. It was a kingdom. It had to do with a kingdom. That's important. And secondly, this kingdom had been completely destroyed by the Babylonians. If we understand this background, okay, we have a clue as to what's going on in the book of Daniel. Let's see if we can explain that a little better. Now, first of all, there were two parts to the kingdom of what is called Israel. It had been divided into two parts. You had the northern kingdom and you had the southern kingdom. The northern kingdom was called Israel, and the southern kingdom was called Judah. Now, if you have never read through the Bible carefully, if you have never read through the Old Testament, you might not know this. But in the books of Kings, First, Second Kings, First and Second Chronicles, you find that in the days of David's son, or David's grandson, a man by the name of Rehoboam, Israel was split into two. 10 of the tribes were taken over by a man named Jeroboam, and 2 or 3 of the tribes remaining were taken over by, were controlled by David's grandson, King Rehoboam. Israel was split in two. We won't go into the details of what happened, but it was due to stupidity on the part of David's grandson. Well, let me just tell you quickly. You know that Solomon was said to be one of the great kings. He was in his days, Israel rose to the pinnacle of worldly greatness, but Solomon taxed the people very heavily. Although the Bible says he was the wisest man who ever lived, in some things he was stupid. When it came to women, he was stupid. Apparently, when it came to taxing the people, he was stupid too. He overtaxed them. And so when he died, his son Rehoboam came to the throne, and the people came to his son and they said, "King, your father taxed us mercilessly. Tell us what you plan to do so we can know what we are going to do." And this stupid son of Solomon had nothing of his father's wisdom, apparently. He went to the old men in his kingdom, the advisors, and he said, "What shall I tell the people?" And they said, "King, it is true. Agree to what the people say and ease up the burden on them." And the king wasn't satisfied. He went to the young men that he grew up with, his companions, the young giddy-headed people, and they said to him, listen, these people need to know that you need to deal with them with a firm hand. Tell them your father chastised them with whips, and you are going to beat them with scorpions. Now, you really wonder how somebody could be so stupid. But that's what he did. He went to the people and he said, "My father chastised you with whips, and I'm going to chastise you with scorpions." He was saying to them, they came to ask him for mercy, and he was saying, "I'm going to make it double hard." You know, like what Pharaoh did when Moses came. He doubled the task of the children of Israel. And that is so stupid. I mean, that's the work of a brutal dictator. That's not the work of a wise king. And so the people rebelled against Rehoboam, and they broke away, and a man named Jeroboam took over, and 10 of the tribes went with him, and they became the northern kingdom. If you look at the screen, you can see that part highlighted in blue. That's the northern kingdom, which came to be called Israel. And if you remember some of the wickedest kings in Israel, like Ahab and Omri and Manasseh, these were all kings in the kingdom of Israel. But over in the other part of the kingdom, 2 of the tribes stayed with Rehoboam because he was the descendant of David. And those tribes were Judah, because David was from the tribe of Judah. And the other tribe that stayed with them was Benjamin. I'm not sure why Benjamin stayed with them. And then, of course, there was a priestly tribe called the Levites. They stayed with them as well, stayed with David. So you ended up with two Israel was divided into two kingdoms, and it stayed like that. Now, eventually, the northern kingdom, called Israel, was destroyed by the Assyrians. The Assyrians came and scattered these 10 tribes, and nobody knows what happened to them. Okay? People like Herbert W. Armstrong, the Worldwide Church of God, they say that these people were taken away to England, and they are the people who migrated to America. And so he says that the Americans and the English are the true Israelites today, which, of course, in my opinion, is absolute rubbish. But anyway, and the Mormons say that they went away to America and they became, if you ever read the Book of Mormon, they make up some fictitious people who were living in America called the Lamanites, and they became the Red Indians, and they were the true children of Israel. All kinds of craziness you hear sometimes. There's some kind of idea that some people have that they went to some parts of Africa. They say some of them can be found in Ethiopia, some of them can be found in the southern parts of Africa. I really don't know, because the Bible doesn't say, it just says that they were scattered everywhere. Nobody can identify or pinpoint them today. They lost their identity. But the other two tribes, Judah and Benjamin, and of course the Levites, they remained in Judah, which was where David's descendants continued to rule. God had promised that David would always have a light. He would never take away the kingdom from him. So you had kings like Rehoboam and Josiah and Joash, and many of these people, the better kings that you read about, they were from the Judah side of the kingdom. Now, after the other 10 tribes were destroyed by the Sumerians.
Bro David, was the ark with Judah?
Yes, the ark was with Judah, because the Levites remained with Judah. And the temple, of course, I should make that point, Brother Cliff. The temple remained in Jerusalem, and Jerusalem was with the Judah side. Over and in the Samaria side, the Israel side, which was sometimes called Samaria, sometimes it was called Ephraim. Over in that side, they built they set up idols. One was set up in Dan, one was set up in Samaria. Jeroboam deliberately set up idols so that the people would not go over to Judah to worship. So they set up another system of worship over in the Samaria side, over in the Israel side, to stop the people returning to Judah, the Judah part of the kingdom. So it was a terrible apostasy, really. Now, the people in the Judah side, they continued to worship God up and down, hot and cold, but little by little they became worse and worse and worse, until eventually they also were taken away by another race, by the Babylonians, who were kind of related to the Assyrians. They were taken away by the, I beg your pardon, by the Babylonians, but they were not scattered to the four winds like the other 10 tribes. They remained as a group, and they were taken to Babylon. They left a few old people in the land to keep it and to maintain it, but they took away most of them to Babylon. King Nebuchadnezzar took them away, and they were captives there for 70 years. Now, that's a time when they came to be called the Jews. So the Jews were not all 12 tribes. The Jews were strictly those from Judah and Benjamin, plus the Levites. Okay, they are the ones that were called the Jews. And many of the peculiar attitudes that you see belonging to the Jews are things that they developed when they were in Babylonian captivity. So the book of Daniel comes to us in the context. Daniel was somebody who belonged to the Jews. He belonged to this part of the kingdom. He was not from the blue side, which is the Ephraim, the Samaria, the Israel side. He's from this orange colored part. That's where Daniel and his friends came from. And they were taken captive by Nebuchadnezzar, and they were taken away to Babylon. So this is the circumstance that we find ourselves in when we come to the book of Daniel. We are in a nation that is in captivity. We are in a nation that has been completely overrun by a foreign power, specifically the power of Babylon. It's interesting that in the Bible, the other 10 tribes never come back into the picture. They are never again in the picture. There are some prophecies in Isaiah and some of the minor prophets where God talks about in the last days, the whole house of Israel is going to come together again. The northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. And some people interpret this literally, and they think that there's going to be a gathering together again of the Jews and the 10 tribes, and they're all going to come together again in a literal, physical way. And this is because they don't understand to take the symbols of prophecy and interpret them according to the new covenant. Because in the new covenant, there's no physical Israel in God's favor, whether the Jews or the 10 tribes. The Israel of the new covenant are those who are in Christ. And every promise that is made about Israel coming together in the last days, even Romans 11, all of these prophecies have to do with the true Israel, the spiritual Israel coming together when we understand it properly. Anyway, let's move on, because I wanted to make the point that this is what we see. What we are seeing is this is the condition in which Daniel finds himself. And this condition is what God uses to give us the prophecies of Daniel. They are related, as I'm going to point out. So, I went through all of this. Let me just read the details. The northern kingdom was destroyed. You can read the details here in 2 Kings 17, verses 5 to 7. It says, the king of Assyria came up throughout all the land, went up to Samaria, besieged it 3 years. In the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria took Samaria. Samaria was the capital of the northern kingdom, and carried Israel away into Assyria, and placed them in Hala in Habor by the river of Gozan, and in the cities of the Medes. For so it was that the children of Israel had sinned against the Lord, against Yahweh their God, which had brought them up out of the land of Egypt, and from under the hand of Pharaoh the king of Egypt, and had feared other gods.
Quick question, Brother David.
Sure, Brother Andrew, go ahead.
The Samaritans that we read of in Jesus' day, are these descended from Northern Kingdom people?
Absolutely. Their chief city, even in the time of Jesus, was Samaria. Remember, Jesus was passing through Samaria, and he met the woman at the well. She was a Samaritan. Now, these people were from the 10 tribes, but they were they had descended into what we would call a mongrel race. And that's why the Jews hated them so much. It's like, well, let me personalize it a little bit. My mother had a Chinese father. Her father came from China, and her mother was of Indian descent, so she was a mix. But her father, back in those days, they were so prejudiced against black people. Her father made her know that if she married a black person, she would no longer be a part of the family. And so when she got married to my father, I never knew my grandfather on that side. I never knew him, never met him, because she couldn't go to see him, because she was cut off from her family. I mean, her siblings came around after a while. We kind of knew them from a distance, but certainly not her father, because he was so prejudiced against black people. So the thing is, it was kind of like this with the Jews. They were so, and they still are, so extremely prejudiced against all races. They consider that one part of their unique identity is that their blood is pure. And I mean, some of the ways that God dealt with them encouraged this idea too. God told him that if somebody he could not trace his ancestry, his genealogy, he was not to be a part of the priesthood. You had to show that you were pure Jewish blood. And we understand that it had meaning, symbolic meaning for the true people of God today. We have to be pure blooded, in that the only blood that is in us is the blood of Christ. So all of this had meaning, but they took it literally. And so because these Samaritans, when they were taken away by the Babylonians, the people who remained in the country, they intermingled with the tribes around, and what they considered the pure blood became corrupted. And so the Jews came to hate these Samaritans as a mongrel race. And because the Samaritans claimed that they were still God's people, and they claimed that, you know, the original temple had been set up in Samaria, in their part of the country, and so the Jews hated them. So it was the same people, Brother Andrew, with a slight modification, because they were the same people with their blood polluted, quote unquote, but they were from the same stock. So it tells you how far these Samaritans, these Israelites, these Ephraimites had gone. It says, and they caused their sons and their daughters to pass through the fire. They used divination and enchantments. They sold themselves to do evil in the sight of the Lord to provoke him to anger. Therefore the Lord was very angry with Israel and removed them out of his sight. There was none left but the tribe of Judah only. So when it says the tribe of Judah only, of course, it means Judah plus Benjamin. And as I said, the Levites. All the other 10 tribes were gone. It says Judah alone remained. Okay? So, what did I do? Okay. It says, for the children of Israel walked in all the sins of Jeroboam, which he did, and they departed not from them, until the Lord removed Israel out of his sight. Yahweh removed Israel out of his sight, as he had said by all his servants the prophets. So was Israel carried away out of their own land to Assyria unto this day. Now, when the Jews were taken away, when Judah was taken away, God said it would be for 70 years. But there was no time on the other 10 tribes. They never came back. The only people who were left were the old people and the weak people and people who were not fit for war. They were left in the land, and as I said, they intermingled with the nations around. And so the king of Assyria brought men from Babylon and from Cutha and from Ava and from Hamath and from Sepharvaim, and placed them in the cities of Samaria instead of the children of Israel. So that explains, Brother Judah, why there was such a hatred among the Jews for these people, because you can see people from Babylon, from Cutha, from Ava, from Hamath, from Sepharvaim, they came into the land and they mingled with these people. So the Jews would regard these people as having impure blood and not fit to be called God's people. That's why they hated them so much, and they considered them to be dogs and less than dogs. Then the southern kingdom, Judah itself, eventually was also destroyed. And it tells you why. The Bible tells you why. In 2 Chronicles 36:16-17, it says, but they mocked the messengers of God, and they despised his words, and they misused his prophets, until the wrath of Yahweh arose against his people, till there was no remedy. Therefore he brought upon them the king of the Chaldees, that's Nebuchadnezzar, who slew their young men with the sword in the house of their sanctuary, and had no compassion upon young man or maiden, old man, or him that stooped for age. He gave them all into his hand. And all the vessels of the house of God, great and small, and the treasures of the house of the Lord, and the treasures of the king and of his princes, and all these he brought to Babylon. And they burnt the house of God, and they brake down the wall of Jerusalem, and burnt all the palaces thereof with fire, and destroyed all the goodly vessels thereof. So this is the second destruction now of the southern kingdom. And it tells you what they did to the king. All the armies of the Chaldees pursued after the king. They overtook him in the plains of Jericho. All his army were scattered from him. They took the king, brought him up to the king of Babylon. They gave judgment upon him, and they slew the king, the sons of Zedekiah, before his eyes, and they put out the eyes of Zedekiah. This was one of David's descendants. They dug out his eyes, killed his children before his eyes. They bound him with chains of brass, and they carried him to Babylon. And the reason was that Nebuchadnezzar had made an arrangement with him to continued to pay tribute to Babylon, but he rebelled against the king of Babylon. And so when Nebuchadnezzar came against him, he treated him very harshly, dug out his eyes. And the only reason he didn't kill him was because he was the king, carried him to Babylon as a blind man. So this was the situation. Yeah, 1 second. This was the situation in among God's people. Their kingdom was in devastation, completely devastated. Yes, go ahead. Is it Brother Andrew?
Brother
Somebody.
Modest.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Brother Modest. Go ahead.
You said this is the second time that the Southern Kingdom was overtaken.
Well, not completely wiped out. They were dominated by the Babylonians on 3 occasions. The first occasion, they were to pay tribute to Babylon. They rebelled. The king Nebuchadnezzar took that king out of the way and put one of his brothers in charge. And so again, they were to pay tribute to Babylon. This one rebelled again. And so this time Nebuchadnezzar said, it is enough. And he went and he dug out his eyes. He took away all the people to Babylon. I think on the second occasion also, he took away some of the people to Babylon, but not most of them. But this third occasion, he took away everybody. Yeah. All right. It says, and them that were escaped from the sword carried he away to Babylon, where they were servants to him and his sons, until the reign of the kingdom of Persia, because it was in the time of Persia that they were able to return. The 70 years were fulfilled, and they were able to return to the land of Palestine, to fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah, until the land had enjoyed her Sabbaths, or as long as she lay desolate, she kept Sabbath to fulfill 70 years, 70 years. Yes, go ahead.
Please keep in mind, for those who are on the phone, can you tell me where the scriptures are written? Where did you say? Because I didn't catch it.
My apologies. I keep forgetting that. Okay, so the scriptures relating to the overthrow of Judah, 2 Chronicles 36, verses 16 to 17. And then, well, 16 to 19. And then 2 Kings 25, verses 5 to 7. And then 2 Chronicles 36, verses 20 to 21. So actually, all those passages from Chronicles are the same block of verses. I just divided them up in 2 parts. All right, so you're welcome, Sister Elizabeth. So this is the background, and I'm sorry, we had to go through a bit of history there so you can get a full grasp of the condition that the Jews found themselves in, because this is the key to understanding the prophecies of Daniel. So there were the important thing to focus on is that there were 4 aspects of the kingdom that were overthrown. 4 aspects of the
Brother
kingdom.
David.
Yes, brother Maris. Yeah, go ahead. It appears we lost him.
I was just quickly Judah was like you said, it was not, they were not completely, all of them were taken. Oh, you can?
Sure. In
You
both.
can hear me now?
I can hear you now.
No, I was just saying quickly that like you said, Judah was not completely taken. All of Judah was not completely taken, because when you read in the book in the book of Nehemiah, you see some of them came to help when is the king Artaxerxes gave the order to go rebuild Jerusalem. Some of these people that were left, not Judah, from Israel, they came to help Judah to rebuild the temple and the gates. So they were not all completely taken.
Right. So in both cases, both with the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, all the people were not completely taken away. You know, but when the Bible says all were taken away, I think it means in the sense that the backbone of the kingdom was broken. So we have nearly 3 million people in Jamaica. So if by some strange manipulation they were able to remove, let us say, 2.5 million people from Jamaica, and they were able to leave 200,000 people in Jamaica. And then they brought in, let us say, Americans or French people into Jamaica, voluminous amounts of them. Then essentially what we are saying is that Jamaica no longer exists, or that all the people are gone from Jamaica. A different culture comes in, a different set of people, so that though you have a few remnants, obviously the Jamaican culture and the Jamaican identity would be overthrown, and it would effectively cease to be Jamaica anymore. So it's something like this that the Bible is saying. It's showing us that effectively the nation of the nation that God established, it doesn't exist anymore. So the few exceptions that remain, they never would have made much of an impact. So that's why when the people came back from Babylon, then we had a resurrection of the kingdom, as it were. So, but I agree with what you say, Brother Modest. So the four aspects of the kingdom that were overthrown. Number one, the physical kingdom. When we say the physical kingdom, we mean the land space itself. Every kingdom that we are aware of has a land space. There's a piece of, what do they call, real estate. There's a piece of real estate that is associated with the kingdom. That is one reason why the kingdom of God as we have it today is so unusual, because we are in a kingdom when we have never experienced the real estate of that kingdom. The kingdom that we know exists, that all of us in this room are a part of, we have never experienced the real estate of the kingdom, even though we are going to. It has some real estate and we're going to experience it. So we talk about the physical kingdom, which means that the land itself, that was overthrown. It was taken from the people of Israel and the people of Judah in this case, and it was given to strangers. Secondly, you had the overthrow of the political kingdom. The king who was the head of state, he had his eyes dug out, his children were killed before his eyes, and he was taken away as a captive in a strange land. The political structure of the kingdom of Judah ceased to exist. There was no longer any governing body that controlled the land. They were governed by strangers. The Babylonians controlled the country. Whatever happened there, it had to be done at the direction of Babylon, not by Jewish people. The physical kingdom was gone. The political kingdom was gone. The religious kingdom was gone. We saw where they destroyed the sanctuary. They burned it down. They broke it down. They took away the sacred vessels out of the temple, carried them away to Babylon, and put them in the house of their gods. So their religion no longer existed. They no longer carried out the services of sacrifices morning and evening. They no longer celebrated their feast days. God said that their Sabbaths, the land would keep the Sabbaths while they were gone, because there was no longer any religious service that was carried on. And these, remember, especially in ancient times, these were the foundation stones of every kingdom. Today, we might not have much of a religious element to most of the kingdoms today, most of the political systems. And that's interesting, because in the past, the religious aspect of it was the major element of a kingdom. I suppose it's an indication that we really are moving towards an atheistic world. Even though religion in a kingdom usually leads to great persecution for minorities, but still, it's interesting that at least they always had some kind of religious element for the most part. And the fact that today it is so strongly, so powerfully rejected, I think it's a further sign that we are moving towards a completely atheistic world. Anyway, we'll come to that later on in our studies. And then fourthly, there's what I refer to, for want of a better word, the demographic kingdom. So you have the physical kingdom, the political kingdom, the religious kingdom, and the demographic kingdom. And by demographic, there may be a better word for it, but I'm using this word because it's the one that I find comes to my mind. Demographic means the people. All of these four things together make up a kingdom. And all of these were taken away by the Babylonians. The people were taken away, the religion was taken away, the governing element, the governing structure was taken away, and the physical kingdom was taken away and given to other people. So this is where God's people found themselves. And this is the background that God used to give us the book of Daniel. Yeah, the population of the kingdom, as Brother Judah says. So the popular perspective of the book of Daniel, and this is what I think this kind of confusing for a long time. They said that the book of Daniel was one prophecy, but that what happens is that God takes the same prophecy and he repeats it 4 times. All that happens is that he gives more details. To be honest, that's interesting, right? You say one thing and you say it 4 times. You say to a person, I'm good. You say again, I am bueno. You say again, I'm all right, man. You say again, I'm cool. You find 4 different ways to give the idea that everything is okay. You're simply repeating yourself. And they said that that is what happened. That's what I learned. When I say they said, you might wonder who is they. But most of the time when I say they, I'm talking about my religious background, the church I grew up in, and the things we studied. The idea is that it's the same prophecy in Daniel 2, Daniel 7, Daniel 8, Daniel 10 to 12, but it's simply that each time God gives us more details. But this is not perfectly right. There may be some element of truth to it, but it leaves out some important considerations. And that is what we want to look at here. I want to point out. Here's what I consider to be the true perspective, or the more, maybe I shouldn't say the true, I would say the more complete perspective. But let me, for the purpose of our illustration, I'm going to say the true perspective. But you can interpret that to be saying the more comprehensive perspective. It is that it deals with, rather than the same history repeated 4 times, it's 4 different aspects. It's 4 prophecies dealing with the restoring of 4 aspects of the kingdom. Not the same prophecy 4 times, but 4 different prophecies. But because they overlap, they seem to be talking about the same thing, but each one has a very different focus. I don't want to confuse anybody. I hope you can all understand what I'm saying. We will have the opportunity for questions in case you find it a little confusing. So let me outline it on the screen, and I'm coming to an end shortly. So everybody recognizes this. This is the first prophecy in the book of Daniel. Nebuchadnezzar's dream, which is it's almost like the foundation of all prophecy, because it gives you an image of the history of the world from the time of Daniel down to the end of time. Everything is in this image, but there are many, many, many details that are left out. This gives you a panorama or a broad view. So what do we see? We see that the head of gold represented the kingdom of Babylon. The belly and the thighs, the breast and the arms of silver represented the kingdom of Medo-Persia. The breast and the belly and the thighs of brass represented the kingdom of Greece. The legs of iron represented the kingdom of Rome. The feet of iron mixed with miry clay represented divided Rome, which represents more or less the kingdoms of Europe today. That is Daniel chapter 2, the prophecy of Daniel chapter 2. In Daniel chapter 7, you have a repetition of the same prophecy. It seems, like I said, there's a different emphasis. You have a lion representing Babylon, a lion with 2 wings. You have a bear with 3 ribs representing Medo-Persia. You have a leopard with 4 wings representing Greece. You have a terrible beast with 10 horns representing Rome. And the 10 horns, of course, represent the divided Roman Empire. That's chapter 7. So we have chapter 2 and we have chapter 7. Then you come to chapter 8, and chapter 8 begins not with the lion, not with Babylon. It begins with Medo-Persia. And here you have a ram with 2 horns representing Medo-Persia. Then we have a goat with a horn between its eyes, a notable horn representing Greece. In this illustration, they make the goat having 2 normal horns. I don't think they should have put those horns there, because the Bible doesn't mention those horns. It just mentions 1 horn in the forehead. Then Rome is represented by an exceedingly great horn that comes out of the horns on the head of this goat. And then it also represents, I believe, the same divided Rome. It goes right down. As a matter of fact, it should have come down to divided Rome, this great horn. Then when you come over to Daniel 11 and 12, what we see, instead of seeing images or fierce wild animals or domesticated animals, what we see are literal pictures of kings fighting wars. And they actually come down to the place where you have the king of the north and the king of the south. So these are 4 prophecies in the book of Daniel, and all of them seem to be covering the same period. Well, the first 2 cover from Babylon down to the divided Rome. But the third one leaves out Babylon, and it takes you right down to the end. And the fourth one leaves out Babylon, but it takes you right down to the end. So it seems that these prophecies cover the same period of time. Somebody will say, why do the last 2 leave out Babylon? And the reason is because by the time these prophecies were given, Babylon was about to pass from the scene. Babylon is relevant when Nebuchadnezzar had his dream, because Babylon was still vibrant and alive. When Daniel had the vision in chapter 7 with the lion, Babylon was still vibrant and alive. But by the time Daniel had the vision in chapter 8, Babylon was about to pass away. It was about to be overthrown by the Medes and the Persians. So God does not mention Babylon, but he deals with all the other kingdoms that follow. So what I'm saying is that the book of Daniel is about these 4 kingdoms. I want to emphasize the point. It's very clear. I see somebody has unmuted. I'll come to you in a moment. It's very clear. This vision of the great image takes us from the time of Babylon right down to the end of the world. Right down to the end of the world. This vision of the 4 animals takes us from the time of Babylon right down to the end of the world. This vision of the king of the north and the king of the south takes us from the time of the Persians, the Medo-Persians, right down to the end of the world. What do you think this vision covers? Well, many of the theologians say this has nothing to do with the end of the world. It's talking about something that happened in the time of the Greek kings. They say that Daniel chapter 8 is completely out of sync with the rest of the book of Daniel. They say it does not apply. They say it refers to a Greek king by the name of Antiochus Epiphanes. No doubt we'll talk about that more as we continue with these studies, but I'm just saying to you that that is completely, in my opinion, that's completely erroneous, completely false. Just like the other prophecies, this one also takes you from the time of the Persians right down to the end of the world. So this horn here, this little horn on the head of the goat, represents Rome in its 2 phases. That's what I believe, and we can study this more in the future. I'm just giving that broad overview at this point. Maybe some of us might not see why it's important, but some of us might, and I'm just putting it in there. So anyway, this is the shape of the book of Daniel. And now I hope I have the rest of it here. Let me see. Yes, I do. All right. So you have 4 different lines of prophecy here. 1, 2, 3, 4. And what did we say? We said that there were 4 aspects of the kingdom that had been overthrown. The physical kingdom, the religious kingdom, the political kingdom and the demographic kingdom. So this is exactly what God is doing for us. He's giving us a picture of the restoration of Judah, the restoration of the Jews, using this as a template to teach us about the great restoration at the end of time. That is what the book of Daniel is about. So the image, the vision of the image that came to Nebuchadnezzar, is a vision of the restoration of the physical kingdom. Notice what this image is made up of. It's made up of gold, silver, brass, iron, and clay. It's made up of the elements of the earth, physical elements of the earth. And what it tells us is that in the days of these kings, down in the stone, down in the feet of iron and clay, a great stone was cut out of a mountain. Again, it's an element of this world. And it smote the image on the feet, and the image was broken to pieces. And it says here, the verse tells you, then was the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, and the gold broken to pieces together, and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors, and the wind carried them away, that no place was found for them. And the stone that smote the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. Here we are talking about the physical, the restoration of the physical kingdom. God's physical kingdom is to fill the whole earth. God's people are to have their land, their real estate restored to them. That's what God is saying in chapter 2. We go to chapter 7, and we see that there are the 4 animals: lion, bear, leopard, terrible beast, and then the 10 horns at the end. And here we have the restoration of the political kingdom. Now there's something missing from this picture that I should have here. And what I should have is Jesus receiving his kingdom, the 5th kingdom. There are 5 kingdoms. Because what this is telling us is in chapter 7 of Daniel, it says that one like the Son of Man came before the king, the Ancient of Days, and there was given to him a kingdom. Here in this chapter, I think I have that picture. I should have that picture. Let me see. Here it is. Here it is. Okay, I didn't leave it out. One like the Son of Man receives a kingdom. Here it says, and there was given him dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all people, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed. In the second prophecy, the one about the 4 beasts, God tells us about the restoration of the political system, of the monarchy, of the rulership of the kingdom. So the king is restored, the land space is restored, and the king is restored. Then we go to the 3rd prophecy. And what is interesting in the 2nd prophecy here is that all of these symbols are symbols of wild animals. And it's interesting because it just suggests to us that God sees the kingdoms of this world as having the same nature as wild beasts. I think I can see that. That's why God uses wild animals to represent the political kingdoms of this world. These people are like beasts. Maybe they have the hearts of beasts. Just like how he used gold and silver and so on to represent the political kingdom, iron and clay. So he uses wild animals to represent the politics of this world. And I'm sure that that has more than passing meaning. And then when it comes to the 3rd vision, which represented the restoration of the religious kingdom, and I'll show you why we come to this conclusion. He uses animals that are related to the sanctuary service. You use rams, animals, sheep and goats as sacrifices in the sanctuary system. So again, the very symbols that are used suggest to us that God is looking at the restoration of the religious aspect of the kingdom. So it shows you that there is a power that is fighting against the religion, and it is this little horn. But what does it say? What does God tell us? God says, unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. Notice I put the word restored. I've used the word restored because I don't think that the word cleansed is the proper interpretation. God said that the sanctuary service The thing that had been destroyed by the Babylonians was to be restored. Now, was God talking about the Jews? You and I know today that he was not talking about the Jews. He was talking about a greater restoration that was to take place down at the end of time. But he's using the situation that the Jews are in to kind of use it as a representation of what is to happen at the end of time. He's talking to Daniel about the situation of the Jews, but the interpretation has to do with the Israel of the last days. And all of this is very beautifully laid out in the book of Daniel. It tells you about the casting down of the worship of gods, of true worship in Daniel chapter 8. It tells you about a breaking down of this true worship system in the latter days, and then how it is to be restored. In everything, we are looking at a tearing down of God's true Israel and a greater restoration at the end of time. Okay, somebody wanted to say something. So go ahead. I see somebody unmuted. Nadisha, let me mute you because it seems you don't really want to say anything. All right. So the final prophecy about the king of the north and the king of the south. This has to do with the restoration of the people. As I've said, the demographic part of the kingdom. And it takes us right down to the final event, because what it says in Daniel 12, at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince which standeth for the children of thy people. And there shall be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. And at that time thy people shall be delivered, everyone that shall be found written in the book. Now, this is very clear. Nobody could really think that God is here referring to the Jewish nation, except the Jews. In the time of Daniel, notice what it says. It says those who would be delivered were those that would be found written in the book. And that's very interesting, because you know the Jews who went back to who actually returned to Palestine, they had to have their names recorded in a book. They had books with their names. And those who actually went back to Palestine, they checked the records. Those who were allowed to serve and to do certain things, you had to have your name written in the book. So God is using the very language associated with physical Israel. But you and I know it's very clear, the resurrection, the coming of Jesus, the deliverance of thy people, the dead coming back to life, you know that has to do with the second coming of Jesus. So you can see, it's very clear that the prophecies of Daniel have to do with the end of time, not with the Jews. But the Jews all believed, Daniel believed, that it had to do with his Jewish people and their time at the end of 70 years. We know better today. So God used the book of Daniel as a template to highlight greater things to happen in the future. And that is why the book of Daniel is so critical when it comes to understanding Revelation. There's one prophecy in Daniel especially that we are going to focus on in detail when we go to the book of Revelation. But I think this brings us to the end of what I wanted to say for this evening. And we had a rather long study, but I wanted to cover all of this evening. And I suspect there might be one or two questions. If there are not, I'll know that I did an excellent job in explaining. But at this time, I'm going to pause and to open the floor in case there are any questions. Anything that I left you behind, then now is the time to catch up.